Okay, let's wrap it up today. First Corinthians chapter 16. First Corinthians chapter 16, of course, is the last chapter of the book of First Corinthians. Just a little bit of a review, and then we'll finish up this chapter. And time permitting, maybe move into Second Corinthians. I'm not sure how fast our pace is going to be. Um, Do we remember how the church in Corinth came into existence? It happened in about AD 52. Paul is on his second missionary journey. Remember from your studies of the book of Acts, Paul took three missionary, what we call missionary journeys. The second one is where he establishes the church in Corinth. If you were reading along in the book of Acts, it'd be Acts chapter 18, where he comes into this city, encounters the people there, establishes the church. And as often is the case, the Apostle Paul feels personally invested in these churches that he has established. And so he will either make return trips there to kind of check on them, to appoint elders, to help them in their progress in the faith, or, as often the case as here, he would write correspondence to them, write letters to them. And that's what's taking place here. Again, church established about AD 52, second missionary journey, Acts chapter 18. It was written, we believe, from Ephesus on his third missionary journey. So he's still traveling on his third journey, probably around 5 years after he had visited there and established the church. And so in those 5 years, a lot of bad had happened. And you can see the the difficulty, if you will. They were 12 apostles. There were other people uh, gifted with gifts of the Holy Spirit, and those were intended to fill that void in the absence of the apostles. But as we see in this letter, that sometimes even those good gifts can be twisted and become negative things. And so Paul is dealing with the issues in the church that are plentiful. In the church at Corinth. In fact, you could just almost say every time you turn the page, there's a new problem and almost a worse growing problem that is there. We joke, or kind of joke that a homework assignment could be just make a list of all the problems that are at the church at Corinth. And so he is writing to address those issues. Again, I would categorize the problems that Paul addresses at Corinth in two categories. One is actions that they were doing, and the other was just doctrinal misunderstanding. And so teaching and practice, those two categories. I think it leads heavily on the practice part of it, but there are some things having to do with their understanding of the faith. And we saw that in the last chapter that we looked at, 1 Corinthians 15, their misunderstanding about the resurrection. Now, with all of those problems and all of the misunderstandings they have, we might be a little surprised by chapter 16 and at least the beginning of it, that he's talking about the collection for the saints. I don't know if it was me, I'd probably say, like, these people got enough problems. So I'm going to stop with the resurrection. I'm not going to bring that other thing up. But Paul, I think it shows his optimism that he feels like this is a church that's going to continue, that's going to learn from their mistakes, is going to continue to grow, to thrive. And so they need to know these kind of things. And so that to me speaks of Paul's optimism that he would address them as he does famously for us, at least, in 1 Corinthians chapter 16. Now concerning the collection for the saints. As I've given orders to the churches of Galatia, so you must also do. And so we'll talk about the instructions here. But a couple things we're going to learn in Second Corinthians, getting about the middle of Second Corinthians, that Paul did exactly what he said here, that Corinth wasn't the only one, that there are other people, other churches involved in this collection. And so let's just look at, first of all, what specifically is he talking about here? The collection for the saints. That could be for the Christians that needed the help. Okay, the needy saints, and so this is an act of benevolence. Well, if we were putting it in a bank ledger category, we'd say in the area of benevolence. But remember, this started as early as Acts chapter 2. We are many years past that, but it seemed like a sequence of unfortunate events had happened that. For one, as Paul himself would tell us, that the gospel often appeals not to the upper class, but often to the lower middle class and lower classes. And so that fact alone tells you that you're probably going to have some financial issues to deal with. That these aren't congregations full of wealthy millionaires, landowners, and all that kind of thing. These are again the lower classes of people, financially speaking, at least. And so that sets it up almost immediately that we might have these kind of financial concerns. But you'll remember the situations that maybe led up to this is that the gospel was first preached there in Jerusalem when they were multiple people from all over the world. And what seemed to have happened is that those people came to Jerusalem. They were Jews who came for the feast days. They obeyed the gospel, and they just kind of wanted to stay around. We didn't want to obey the gospel and hear this teaching and then go back to, Timbuktu and not have any connection with the apostles and other Christians. And so they seemed to stay. And so that was the second layer of problems, that now these people are they're away from their homes, they're away from their jobs, they're away from their gardens and their crops, whatever it might be. And so uh, these needy saints that were local in Jerusalem already started off not being the most wealthy, and now you add this layer of people who are displaced. And so that's where we see in the book of Acts, they're selling possessions. Remember the story of Barnabas um, uh, in chapters 4 and 5 of the book of Acts. And so you've got that, people selling possessions to help those needy people, which is very admirable. But now, what does that do to you? That puts you in a vulnerable financial situation. Now, that was my, nest egg. That was my rainy day fund, and I spent that helping you. And so I sure hope nothing happens that's going to affect me. And sure enough, something happens. In the book of Acts, remember Agabus prophesies of a famine in the land. And so now we have that famine. And so there's that third layer. I might would have been all right in a famine if I still had that land that I could sell and buy uh, high price grain or high price, sheep or cows, whatever it is I'm going to eat. But now that's gone. And now we add another layer to this, is the financial insecurity of being a Christian. When we think of first century persecution, Christian persecution, we normally go to the extreme of Stephen, those people being stoned to death and put to death and fed to the lions later on. And that certainly was there and was, we say, the most extreme form of that. But there were other lesser extreme forms, and many of those took the form of financial persecution. Some of it just happened naturally, some of it was directed at them. Um, but, if Christianity is unpopular, which it certainly was in certain regions, among the Jewish leaders, and then later among the Roman leaders. Then the natural fallout of that would be that let's just say that Jason here is a Christian in the first century, and he runs a booth in the marketplace selling something, and it's just known that Jason's a Christian. I'm not a Christian for this example, and I go to the marketplace, and there over here's a non-Christian's booth selling something, and here's Jason's booth. I used to go to Jason; he's the best, he's honest and all that. But if I go over there and some ruler comes by and sees me talking to Jason, they may think I'm a Christian, and I'll get swooped up in this. This guy named Saul of Tarsus is out there gathering up Christians, and they might see me talking to Jason and just say, okay, Ken's now a Christian, so we're going to swoop him up. So I'm not going to Jason's booth anymore. I'm going to go over here to this non-Christian's booth so I can't get in trouble. And so that was just almost the natural fallout of it. And so what happens to Jason's business? It just goes downhill, or it could go even more extreme than that. The rulers could come through and say, you can't sell in the marketplace because you're a Christian. And so you're not just lost business, you're out of business. And so you had the financial things. And of course, you add to that, when the husband's thrown in jail, the father's thrown in jail, there goes the income, or whatever. So we have a lot of factors here as to why there's so much financial insecurity among these Christians, particularly in Judea. That's where the famine happened. That's where most of the Christians are. That's where most of the persecution is. And so that's going to be ground zero for the financial difficulties that are taking place. And it started out, we're going to sell our possessions to help, but now we're sold out. There's nothing else to do. We've got to look elsewhere. And so there's where we're in this context. Adam and then Larry.
Could also be part of the fact that, like you deal with in First Thessalonians, where everybody's like, okay, I'm a Christian and Jesus is coming soon. I sold everything because, hey, I don't need that anymore. I gave it to the church. I gave it to the poor. Like, this is kind of I think, this might take a while. So let's plan ahead a little bit. Don't just sell everything all at once. Don't quit your day job, but lay aside each week as you prosper. Okay, just keep life until you don't have to.
Yeah, we do have that misunderstanding among some. We don't know how big of a group that was. That, like you said, there seemed to be our understanding of First and Second Thessalonians that some of these Christians, in some areas at least, thought Jesus was coming. We'll modernize it in a way our economy works generally. If Jesus is coming back on Thursday and I get paid on Friday, well, I'm going to quit my job on Monday. What's the point of working all week if I get paid on Friday, but Jesus is coming back Thursday? And so, yeah, I'm just going to quit work. Well, Jesus didn't come on Thursday. And so now I'm out of work. And so, yeah, there's multiple factors here that play into that. Larry?
You mentioned happening in other churches too, but it seems like if there was one wealthy congregation that could help, it might have been Corinth, because it was a well-known commercial center, kind of a crossroads and commercial capital of that area.
Yeah, and I think we'll see that played out in Second Corinthians, where Paul comes back to them, kind of reminding them, "Hey, remember?" And these other people, they're poor, and they gave, and we're really almost sounds like we're really depending on you, because you've got the money in this region. So yeah, good points there. And so Paul, as he's on this, remember this is the third missionary journey where he's writing this. He, as all of them, plans to return back to that region, back to Judea, back to Jerusalem. And so he's saying, I'm going to collect on my way back, I'm going to stop by and collect these offerings that you've made for these needy saints in, we find out, Jerusalem and Judea. And so you need to help with that. And so I've given orders, so you must do also. Here's the orders, verse 2. We read this verse oftentimes on the first day of the week. It says, on the first day of the week, let each of you lay something aside, storing up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. Now, there's a lot to unwrap there, and I think for the most part we get this, but there's some misunderstanding among some, and so we'll go through it anyway. When he says, let each one of you lay something aside, I've heard some try to argue that what Paul is saying here is that you individually set something aside. You may do that if you have that luxury, that whether it's in a mason jar that you buried in the backyard or in a bank account or a CD or investment, something, you lay something aside from your paycheck, we would say, every week for these needy saints. That's not what he's saying. He's not just saying you lay this aside in your personal accounts, or in their day and time, it would have been just in their house somewhere. You start a fund in your house. What he's saying is you lay this aside in a collective sense, because the next part of that verse helps us understand that you lay something aside, and from if it had stopped there, then that would have been open to interpretation. Am I laying this aside, in Ken's house, or am I laying this aside collectively at the church? And I could say you could interpret that either way. But the next part of this verse, it tells us that it wasn't laying it aside personally, because he says, storing it up as he may prosper, that there be no collections when I come. So if he's just telling all of us, you put some money aside at home, and when I get there, I'm going to collect it, well, then you'd all had to bring it from, it had to be a collection when I get there. Paul, this is largely seems to be for convenience sake. Paul is saying, when I get there, I may be in a hurry, and in fact, it may work out to where I'm not there on the Lord's day. And so I need y'all to go ahead and be collecting this money, assembling this money into a treasury, to a collection, so that when I come, we don't have to go through that process. Because you think about it, in ancient times, it would have probably taken at least 2 Sundays to accomplish that. The one Sunday is to make the announcement that next Sunday we're going to take up a collection. We can't just say we're taking up a collection today, and everybody's like, oh, well, I didn't bring many. I didn't, I don't have enough money for that, or I've saved it at home, but it's at home, and so okay, next Sunday. And so Paul is saying, I don't have 2 weeks in this, basically. So y'all do the legwork up front. You collect this money as a group, and so that it's there. And so when I come into town, whether it's on a Sunday or on a Thursday, I can grab that bag of money and take it to Jerusalem. And so the collection on the first day of the week. And so we get a couple things that we learn, a few things that we learn about the collection, that it's to be on the first day of the week. And again, I would argue, and I'm not arguing that we change it by any means, but I would argue that that's largely just a convenience factor. Why do we take up a collection on the first day of the week? Because that's when we're here. That's just still, I think it's an ease, it's a convenience factor. Why do we do it? Because it's convenient. That's when we're together. It makes sense to do that when we're together. Another thing that I think we need to see about this, that we might slightly lose sight of, when you do anything with enough regularity, it's tempting for it to lose its meaning, to lose its emphasis. And we can do that with the Lord's Supper. We do that every week. And so the danger is for it just to become some ritual. We just do that, and I didn't even think about Jesus or the cross when I did it, because we just do it so often. And so the challenge is for us to really put our minds and our heart into it, so we do that. The same thing can happen with a collection, that we do that all the time. We're collecting this money, and most of the time, most congregations, we have money left over that we didn't spend. It wasn't like dollar in, dollar out. And so I think we get things reversed here, that here is what, in my humble opinion, is the practice among many local churches. And that is, we're going to pass the plate, or we're going to have the box on the wall, however we collect it, and then we're going to count that money. and then we're going to say, okay, we got X amount of dollars. What can we do with it? Now that we've collected, and I'll just make up a figure, we've collected $1,200. What can we do with $1,200 in the Lord's kingdom? And not a horrible approach, but I don't think that's really the precedent that we see in Scripture. The Scripture was flip that and saying, here's a need, let's collect for that need. There's a difference in just collecting to be collecting and then saying, all right, we've got $1,200, what do we do with it? To me, the scriptural precedent is to say, for example, we've got this need, it's going to cost $1,200, and so let's pass the plate. And I think that's more than semantics. I think it's important for us to understand that we're not just collecting money because we're told lay by and store first day of the week, but it was needs based. Now, I would argue, some would argue from that, well, okay, then if we don't have a need, we don't take up something every Sunday. We might get up here and the treasurer might say, hey, we're good. We're not going to pass the plate today. We don't need any money. And that would be one conclusion to draw from that. I would argue that the correct conclusion is that we have constant needs. We don't just have a need for occasional benevolence. We have a constant need for evangelism, a constant need for the upkeep of the building, the utilities, those kind of things. And so we do a every Sunday collection. Again, not just because it's routine, that's what we always done, but we do it because there's always constant needs that are there. But I think that's important to see the order, the sequence of events here, I think matters. It's not that we collect money and say, okay, now what do we do with it? And see, is there any needs? Anybody got any needs out there? Oh, okay, not. But rather than to say, okay, here's a need. And so I think it wouldn't be a bad practice every once in a while that when we stand up and we do the collection or speak about the collection to just say, hey, here's our needs. We got a light bill, we got a water bill, something broke, we're going to have to buy a new air conditioner, we're going to have to put a new roof on the building. And so those are the needs that we're collecting for. And that's what Paul does here. He's saying, here's the need. The saints, the needy saints in Judea. And so we're going to take up a collection for that. And it's going to be on the first day of the week. So he continues, verse 3, when I come, whomever you approve by your letters, I will send to bear your gift to Jerusalem. I don't know that we necessarily have a legislative precedence here, but we've got what I call a wise precedence. Is Paul is saying, I'm not going to go around to all these places and just collect this money and then say, trust me. I think most of the churches would have trusted Paul, but Paul is saying, no, I'm somebody from there can come with me to see and keep this all above board. And I think again, most congregations we have some kind of checks and balances there to make sure that that's the case. And it's never a matter, or not usually a matter of distrust. Again, I think they would have trusted Paul, but Paul still says somebody from there can take the money and come with me. So it's not just this matter of blind faith that we're just going to throw money at Paul and hope that he does the right thing. But if it is fitting that I go also, they will go with me. So he's just basically saying, I can either send that person, tell them where they need to go and where the need is, or we can go together. I'm headed that way anyway. So now I will come to you when I pass through Macedonia, for I am passing through Macedonia. Macedonia, Achaia is technically this small region where Corinth is located, but it's adjacent to Macedonia. And so when I come through there, I'm going to swing by and see you. But it may be that I will remain or even spend the winter with you, that you may send me on my journey wherever I go. So Paul, there's some definitiveness to this. I'm going to Macedonia. And so I'm going to see you then. I don't know when it's going to be and how long I'm going to be able to stay. Those kind of issues. I may spend the whole winter there, and that wasn't just a leisurely choice. Many times, travel, particularly travel over the water, just shut down in the winter. You just couldn't. And just imagine that. We might complain if you're flying somewhere. You might complain, oh, I got a 4 hour layover, in Chicago or in Dallas, 4 hour layover. Imagine your layover being 3 months long, the whole winter. You get here and then the ships aren't going out for the whole winter. And so you're spending, again, I don't know, 4 months. I don't, it depends on when the spring frost comes, the spring thaw comes. And so Paul says, I may just be stuck there for I do not wish to see you now on the way, but I hope to stay a while with you if the Lord permits. In other words, I don't want to just fly through. I'm hoping that I can spend some time there. But again, he's not sure. But I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost for a great and effective door. Remember, this is our clue that where Paul is when he's writing this letter. He's in Ephesus on his third missionary journey. And he's saying, I don't know about my plans exactly, but here is what I think is going to happen. I'm going to come see you and I go through Macedonia, but I need to stay in Ephesus a while. The need is great here, he seems to be saying. For a great and effective door has opened to me, and there are many adversaries. And Paul says, I just don't feel like I can leave Ephesus. The work is so important here, and I need to be fighting against these adversaries. Now, if Timothy comes, see that he may be with you without fear, for he does the work of the Lord as I also do. So basically, a little bit of letter or note of recommendation. If Timothy comes, Timothy, he's on the same page with me, and so you treat Timothy right, is how we would say it. Therefore, let no one despise him. Now, what do you think that's about? Is there some language? Can you remember from maybe previous studies in Paul's letters to Timothy where maybe similar language is found? Yeah, let no one despise your youth, Paul would say. Now, just because he uses the same word in both letters doesn't mean he's talking about the same thing, but maybe that's what he's talking about. Don't despise Timothy. We would say maybe despise is a little too strong of a word for our language. We might say, don't look down on him because he's young. Don't take him for granted. And so I find it interesting that times haven't changed, have they? We usually, you're going into the hospital tomorrow for serious surgery, and the surgeon comes in and he says, and you tell him that this is the first major surgery I've ever had, and he says, "Me too." you know, Nobody wants that surgeon for his first operation. Have you ever thought about that? That somebody had to be. Hopefully there's a aged doctor, experienced doctor there beside him, but somebody had to be the first open heart surgery for that doctor. Somebody had to be the first, but I don't, that's fine. I just don't want to be that guy. I want that seasoned guy with that experience. And so we still that way. We kind of look down our noses a little bit at somebody that's young and green and inexperienced. Oh, I want to talk to, and Paul says, don't despise him. Again, maybe because of his youth. That's the language that he used to Timothy. Um, so let no one despise him. In other words, treat him with respect, as he mentioned in verse 10. But send him on his journey in peace, that he may come to me, for I'm waiting for him with the brethren. So a couple things. You treat him right, treat him with respect, even though he's young, maybe is the meaning there. And I think also a little bit in that language is don't keep him too long. I need him there. Now, concerning our brother Apollos, I strongly urged him to come to you with the brethren, but he was quite unwilling to come at this time. However, he will come when he has a convenient time. So we don't know the details of that, but it doesn't really matter. But so here's somebody to be looking out for. Timothy, and Apollos, when they come, they're kind of coming on my behalf, so treat them with the proper respect that you would accord me, seems as Paul is saying. So here's Paul, as he often does in the closing of these letters, is he just kind of, here's my itinerary. And so here's my travel plans as best as I have them. And now he switches from that to two more things are going to happen. The last thing is just basically just closing out the letter and saying goodbye, his well wishes. But before that, it is Paul, and this is kind of his pattern in many of these epistles, is he just goes through this quick bullet list of just like one sentence admonition: do this, do that, do that, do that. And so he does that here. Watch. Stand fast in the faith. Be brave. Be strong. Um, I love that verse. Again, it's succinct and it's just like these bullet points, but what's contained in there is so rich and so deep. First of all, just watch. That's a expression that we hear a lot in Scripture. So many times it's paired up with pray, watch and pray. But what does he mean, watch? That just seems kind of a random one-word instruction to just, yeah, you pay attention, you watch. Sometimes it's connected, many times it's connected with Christ's second coming. And we use the silly illustration talking about what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean you go outside and you're just looking up at the sky. Jesus is coming and I want to be the first to see him. It's not watch in that sense, but it's the idea of being alert. Jesus talks about his coming, and the apostles talk about his coming in that sense. And I think we've talked about this before, that the expression that's often used is the thief in the night. And I think we've slightly misunderstood that a little bit. That I would argue that every time that's used in the New Testament, that Jesus is coming as a thief in the night, that it's addressed to unbelievers. In fact, the apostle will say that doesn't apply to us because we don't know when he's coming, but we know he is coming. And so the idea of a thief, I'm not vulnerable to a thief if I know he's coming. I don't need to know when he's coming as long as I'm prepared. And so what am I going to do? With the thief, I'm going to sit there, my armchair, my comfortable chair, and I'm going to turn it away from the television set, and I'm going to turn it toward the front door, and I'm going to have that shotgun in my lap. And so there's the idea of I'm not worried about, I don't know when. The thief hasn't said I'm going to come and break into your house at such and such date and such time, but I'm prepared. And I'm not going to be caught unaware because I know he's coming. There's the idea of watching. And so Jesus, I know I don't know when he's coming, but I know he's coming. And so it's not going to catch me unaware. I'm going to be prepared. I'm going to be watching that front door in the sense of I'm going to be morally and ethically. I'm going to ask for forgiveness. I'm going to live my life right. I'm going to be praying, doing all of those things so that whenever he does come, I'm ready. Larry?
Here and watch TV, they would have thought the guy who's on the wall making sure the city's not getting attacked.
Yeah.
He's the one.
Yeah, watchman is the idea there. Yeah, that's a good point. It's more of an active stance rather than just like you said, rather than just looking at it. So watch, stand fast. We talked about that again. It's a different way of using a word, fast. It doesn't talk about speed. It's the idea of standing firm. Stand firm in the faith. Be brave. Anybody have a translation that translates this verse differently? Courageous and strong. Be brave, be strong. And so, in other words, there's some admonition here for some courage is going to be required. Now, is that because of the persecution? Is this almost like physical bravery and physical strength because of the persecution? Or is this just a moral strength and moral bravery because of the temptations? It could be both, and probably is both, that we need both of those types of strength. Let all that you do be done in love. Now, I love that juxtaposition of those two verses that shows us that what God demands of us is not mutually exclusive. We think of the terms standing fast, being brave, and being strong. And then the very next verse says love. And sometimes in our minds, this idea of this strong figure doesn't match with the loving figure. We think you got to be one or the other. You can be strong and brave, or you can be gentle and loving and kind. But Paul is telling us, no, you can do both. We can multitask. We can be strong and unswervable in our faith, and still be gentle and kind. Max?
Part of they could be alert for, standing guard for, would be false teaching. And then that would come into play with the let all that you do be done in love. Okay, I don't like this guy, but he's teaching the truth, so I'll be on his side, and
Yeah, it shows us the complexity of really human beings and certainly of Christian human beings, that we can be strong. We can say, get out of here to a false teacher, and yet be compassionate and kind to others. We don't have to, treat everybody the same, maybe is the idea there. I urge you, brethren, verse 15, you know the household of Stephanus. That's a name that came up back up in chapter 1 of ones that Paul had taught the truth to. That it is the first fruits of Achaia, and we know that language, and this simply means that they would have been the or one of the first to obey the gospel in that region, and that they have devoted themselves to the ministries of the saints, that you also submit to such and to everyone who works and labors with us. And so, couple letters of recommendation here. Timothy and Apollos, they may come to you from the outside. I need you to know, here's how you treat them. They're on my side. You treat them the way you would treat me. And now another letter of recommendation, but for somebody who's internal. Now Stephanus, who's already there. He's not going to come in from the outside like Timothy and Apollos. He's already there. But you treat him with that type of respect and that type of honor. You submit to him because they've devoted themselves. They have earned a certain level of respect and proper treatment from you. Now, I'm glad about the coming of Stephanus, Fortunatus, and Achaicus, for what was lacking on your part they supplied. And so I'm glad. Now, again, I take that language when he says about the coming of. And again, that's a little bit of vague language. Does that mean that they are coming? Is that a future event? Or is that a past or present event? I take it to be obviously a past event, because he says what was lacking they supplied. And so the coming is not a future. The coming of Stephanus and Fortunatus, it was they came to you earlier, and they have been beneficial to your part. And they've refreshed my spirit and yours. And again, we're not sure what that means exactly. Doesn't really matter. These three names that he's mentioned here, Stephanus, Fortunatus, and Achaicus, they've refreshed my spirit and yours. There's two ways to interpret that, and again, it doesn't really matter. One is that here's Paul, and then here's the church at Corinth. These three men have come to me and refreshed my spirit, and then they left me and they went to you and they refreshed your spirit. And so, in both senses, direct ways. They've helped me, they've helped you, but then there's another way of interpreting that. Glenn?
these guys are the ones that wrote the Corinthian letter to Paul.
Yeah, could very well be that. We know in ancient times that you didn't have a post office. Everybody was an individual mail carrier, and so it may have been that these were the men who came. And so that would be in that secondary sense. We said the primary sense would be they came to me, they refreshed me, they came to you, they refreshed you. The other way, and this would tie in to Glenn's point, if these were the mail carriers, is that they refreshed you And when I heard about that, that refreshed me. When somebody does a good deed for somebody you love, that makes you feel good. Well, that was glad. I'm glad that somebody visited my mother in the hospital. They didn't visit me. They didn't directly, but they still refresh my spirit because they refresh my mom's. You can see that sense in which is the secondary. I'm heard from them about you, and that's just lifted me up in such a way. Again, doesn't really matter the sense, but both are true. Both could be true. Therefore, acknowledge such men. Again, they deserve some respect. They deserve certain type of treatment because of what they have done. The churches of Asia greet you. Aquila and Priscilla greet you heartily in the Lord. With the church that is in their house, we're familiar with those names again from that same area in the book of Acts, and they would have been very familiar with them. All the brethren greet you. And so this again, kind of what we would do if we were writing letters today. So and so says, "Hey, such and such ask about you. Hope you're doing well. I'm passing that along to you." And then he famously, in verse 20, says, "Greet one another with a holy kiss." Again, I would put this in the category. We talked about this in chapter 11 with the idea of the covering, with the idea of foot washing, is that these were cultural accepted ways of dealing with life that can be incorporated into your Christianity. It wasn't that Jesus invented foot washing. They were doing that, but Jesus used it to teach an example of here's the way you need to serve one another. And this idea of greet one another with a holy kiss is just that's the way they common greeting in that day. And so you do that, but with a different significance. It's a holy kiss that you're greeting your brother and your sister. And so again, I would say the argument would be, does that apply today? Yeah, it applies today. Maybe I don't think he's commanding that we kiss each other when we meet, but that we use our common societal courtesies, and that's the way we'd say a holy hug or a holy handshake, and for about a year or so, it was a holy elbow bump, kind of thing. Just whatever is acceptable, you use those greetings to greet one another and show that type of familiarity. The salutation with my own hand, Paul. Now, you don't get sidetracked too much here, but we know from other epistles that many times Paul would have a transcriber, he'd have a secretary that would write these things down. We believe from the Galatian letter and others, it may have been because of Paul's eyesight was a little difficult. And so, but he's saying, I think what he's saying here is that I somebody else actually did the writing, but I'm signing it with my own name. If anyone does not love the Lord Jesus Christ, let him be accursed. O Lord, come. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ be with you. My love be with you all in Christ Jesus. Amen. So interesting that in a letter where he has wore them out and just telling them, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. I can't believe you don't understand. And then closes it out with saying, I love you. It's almost that parent-child relationship. You get that spanking, you get in trouble, and then they turn around and say, I love you. You're like, really? Yeah, that discipline was out of love. And so it needs to have that pairing there, and Paul certainly does that. All right, Lord willing, next time we'll turn the page and look at 2 Corinthians, which is a quick sequel to this letter, and a sequel in every sense of the word. It's an immediate follow-up to what had transpired. And so we're going to talk about the sequence and the circumstances of that next time, and then move into the text of 2 Corinthians.